special guest for our YouTube channel interviews is Jamie Shepherd from Soteria Planning. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Tash. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about what your company does?
Yeah, of course. So at Soteria, we specialise in writing wills, trusts, lasting powers of attorney, and we get involved with some estate administration too.
So really important things.
Yeah, it's the important things that people often know they need to do, and there's just lots of barriers in the way to stop them doing them.
Okay, so typically who needs a will?
So, I mean, of course, there are some people that would say everyone needs a will. Very, very simply, I would say anybody that's got one thing and they've got one person that they love should have a will, just to simplify that. I mean, I get people all the time that own properties and they'll say to me they don't have any assets. And I often think, well, you're not really ever going to have a bigger asset than your property, are you?
No, absolutely. So why is a will so important? Because we'll get asked that, I'm sure, by all the people we look after.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, as simple as this sounds, when you're no longer here, you can't speak. Every single person's got a voice. And the will is essentially your voice. So not only are you deciding who should be in charge of sorting your affairs out, if you've got children under the age of 18, you'll be deciding who should be responsible for those children. And of course, you're also deciding who would inherit your assets. Now, there is something called the laws of intestacy that basically outline what happens to your assets if you die without a will. And of course, for some people, this might cover their wishes. I'll give you a scenario: a married couple, no children, they might be more than happy knowing that if one of them died, everything passes to the surviving person, which is what would happen without a will. My question to them would be, well, what happens if both of you die at the same time? Will your wishes still be carried out?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and people don't necessarily think about, do they? And hopefully it doesn't happen, but it's important to kind of understand all the consequences around, something like that. So once you've made a will, is it easy to change?
Yeah, so I mean, we often get people wanting to update their will. They've written the will with another company. For us, that's a brand new will. We would be starting from scratch. Obviously, I cannot comment on how other providers will work in terms of if you write a will with them, will they charge you an amendment fee to amend it? But very simply with us, yes, we will. We use software to draft all of our wills, which we believe is a massive contribution to making sure that there are no errors and making sure you can do things within a certain time frame. And the software that we use, it's fairly straightforward to make amendments to those documents.
Okay, so a lot of people probably think that they might need a solicitor or some sort of legal person to do this for them. Is that not really the case?
I mean, it's one of those questions, isn't it? Everyone thinks that you need to go and see a solicitor to write a will, but you can write your own will. There's more and more avenues now where you can write your own will, whether it be your traditional pack from WH Smith, your online version. And the problem is, so we do a lot with technology where we ask clients to fill out forms for us, and we don't ever say, well, fill that form out and that's the will done. We'll say, fill that form out and then we'll have a chat around what you filled out. And I'd probably say 70% of the time, the client didn't actually mean to put what they put on the form. I'd probably say more than 3/4 of the time, people get confused with those forms. So it's actually quite scary thinking that there are a lot of people out there that have written wills themselves and not had them checked.
Yeah, it's really, this is, like you say, your assets, your most important things, the things you've worked for, paid for, or might have, I don't know, things like jewellery that's been passed down through sort of generations of families. It's really important to get it right, isn't it? And understand what you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as a firm, I mentioned earlier, we don't, to write a will, there will be some solicitor practices that traditionally will very simply write those wills from scratch. They'll have a book of clauses and they'll put them in. And there is no right or wrong way to write a will. Of course, some lawyers might like to flex muscles and say you must do it this way, but there are lots of companies with super offerings around technology just to make things easier. And if you speak to any kind of contested probate lawyers, they'll say that some technology firms will assist with the drafting of wills because it will help eradicate errors. So I mean, as a firm, we are members individually of the Society of Will Writers. We are fully insured as well. So if you look at the kind of scale of, right, do your own will, go and see a high street solicitor, we're not kind of, I wouldn't say we're in the middle, we're closer to the top.
Mm-hmm. And you know, when you've written your will, where do you store it? You know, what do you do with it then?
Yeah, so there's lots of places, and very, very simple. We say to clients, well, it's completely up to you. So we will offer them a professional storage option through the National Will Archive. There's a small fee per annum. It's for a vault, so they can stick any kind of legal documents in there. It's not per person or per vault. There are other options available. Ones that we're not too confident recommending, or some we haven't really trialed. And of course, clients can store their own documents at home. We'll make them aware of the risks of doing so. But for me, if a client writes a will, it's their will. If they want to store it at home, or they want to give a copy to Joe Blogs, then that's exactly what they can do.
So if people move house or have a lifestyle event, you know, maybe have children, should they change their will?
Yeah, so I'd say there's always a trigger that would make somebody write a will. I mean, I'll give you a scenario: husband, wife, couple of children. They've got some fairly straightforward planning, and they very simply move their main residence. It would always be worth a review of their will, but they probably wouldn't need to change anything. If you've got somebody where they're gifting a property to somebody, and they obviously sell that property and purchase a new property, then they would need to review and potentially change that will. In terms of other life events, if somebody has a child, absolutely. Unless their current will was written in anticipation of children, then they would definitely need to amend that. You've also got to consider people potentially inheriting. You've got to consider people getting divorced. All of those are key areas for people to revisit any will that they've got. And one of the main things, as I say, there's no kind of industry norm. You might go and see a high street solicitor who charges you a couple of £100 for your will, and if you go back to them to make a change, they might charge you a couple of £100 again. Or they might do what's called a codicil, which again could still be a couple of £100. Now, for me, it's actually getting people to remember to change their will. So one of the things that we do, we've been doing it now for about a year, we've got a client newsletter that goes out every single month. And I'd probably say each newsletter generates 7 to 8 kind of amendments for us, because we're just in that client's head. So we are only 3.5 years old, and we're generating clients that want to change their will already. I'm immensely proud of that, because I think that there's no point in having a will unless you're going to keep it updated. No,
absolutely. And I think just talking to you, that, you know, I know I've got a will, I'm married with 2 children, all of those things. I know how important these things are, you know, that if you're not around, that your wishes are, you know, adhered to, and the stuff goes to the right people. But one of the other things you do are things called power of attorneys. And what is that? You know, can you explain it to people in simple terms?
Yeah, of course. So a power of attorney, a lasting power of attorney, is a legal document that allows you to appoint someone or more than one person to be able to make decisions for you when you can't make decisions yourself. Now, if you think about society associates an LPA with an older person, because somebody losing mental capacity is traditionally associated with things like Alzheimer's, dementia, vulnerability, or just old age. But actually, if you think about those things, if you look at me and you, Tash, so married, children, property, mortgage, we're probably, and I can't speak for myself, I'm not concerned about waking up tomorrow with Alzheimer's, dementia, being vulnerable, having a stroke. Those things could happen to me, they could happen to you, but they're not really my risk tomorrow. My risk is actually, well, what happens if I have a car accident? I do a lot of running. I do a lot of running on the trails. What happens if I fall over and hit my head? In reality, without an LPA, nobody can make decisions for me. So whether that be around my business, whether that be around my mortgage, I mean, my mortgage is in my sole name. My wife is on it, but the mortgage comes out of my bank account. I am a prime example of, if I didn't have an LPA in place and I lost mental capacity, my family would really struggle. People just assume that if you're married, that spouse would just be able to make decisions. And I wish that was the case, because things would be so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
The lack of education around an LPA is actually quite scary.
Yeah, I guess, like you say, I think a will, people kind of know what a will is there to do, but an LPA, you know, like you say, probably is associated with an older person, but actually it's just as important for younger people as well, you know, just to make sure the decisions are made, you know, if they can't make them.
Yeah, what we try to do is we try to get people to consider being proactive rather than reactive. I mean, there's no harm in having something in place that's not needed, just to give you peace of mind. I mean, personally, I'd rather have something in place that's not needed than need something and not have it in place.
It's a bit like you know, car insurance. If you take that, for example, if you take car insurance, you know, we all have it in the hope that we never need it, you know. But the crazy thing is, sometimes we don't look at the most important thing, which is us, you know, and looking after ourselves and our family. So, you know, an LPA sounds as though it's as important, if not more important, than a will in some cases.
Yeah, and that car insurance example was a really, really important example, Tash, one that I give people quite a lot, because we know that car insurance is mandatory. So I've had it for the last 17 years, never claimed, spent a lot of money. Of course, there are people out there that if it wasn't mandatory, if it was optional, they wouldn't have it. There are people out there that would go and buy £100,000 brand new car and not insure it if they didn't have to. So it's all down to personal preference, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about that all the time to people, you know, that we insure our cars, our houses, our cats, our dogs, you know, and actually sometimes we need to look closer to home and think, who's the most important asset, you know, at home. So it's been really helpful to have this kind of brief chat with you around the importance of wills and LPAs. My last question to you is a fun fact question, I think, is I'd like to know what Soteria Planning, where does the name come from?
Yeah, thank you, Tash. When I was setting the company up, I didn't want to call myself Jamie Shepherd Wills and Trusts. No disrespect to any other company that does that, but I kind of felt, well, I wanted to build a business that others would be involved in. And I'm lucky enough to have a number of people involved within the business, employed people, contractors, non-exec director. And so I'm glad I actually chose a name that wasn't associated to me. Soteria is actually the Greek goddess of protection and preservation from harm. And so it kind of goes well in terms of our values and how we see what we do.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. Thank you for that. Now I know. Thank you really so much for your time. You know, it's so important for people to really address these things sooner rather than later. So hopefully we'll catch up again. And I guess the point is, if anybody wants to speak to you or your team, they can come through us and we can put them through to you, and then you can help them out with whether they need wills or LPAs or that kind of thing. You're more than happy to take that, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Tash.